Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Unfortunately, I don't have the best news to share today. Or maybe it's a mix of good and bad, depending on how you take it. You might have already noticed a slight difference in my voice. For a while now, I've been dealing with some symptoms, especially on days when I record more than once. I feel like I have to push harder to speak, or I need to take long breaks just to get through recordings. Some months it's been better, other times worse, and I've been trying to ignore it for a while. Going to the doctor isn't exactly cheap, and it's easy to keep putting it off. But over the past few weeks, it's become more persistent, and I finally had to get it checked. I was diagnosed with chronic functional dysphonia, which basically means I have to put more effort into speaking. I experience vocal fatigue, inconsistency, and sometimes my voice just gives out. The diagnosis is still very recent, but since then, I haven't really been able to sleep. I've been thinking a lot about the channel, especially now that I just launched the second one. It feels like everything is happening at once. Now here's the part that, for me, is good news. But I understand it might feel different for some of you, especially since many of you are here for the voice as well. I'm lucky to have a very close family, and when I shared this with my brother, he didn't hesitate for a second to step in and help. He's already helped me before when things got overwhelming with the kids and because he genuinely loves what I do here. But now, he's going to be a more regular presence. So for now, I don't know exactly when I'll be able to come back to recording myself. I'm going to be doing some tests, following treatment, and trying to rest my voice as much as possible. In the meantime, my brother will be taking over the narration of the stories. I'll still be the one choosing them, working on them, and building the videos. But it won't be my voice you're hearing for a while. You'll be hearing my brother Chris and sometimes my dad Josh. When one can't do it, the other will step in. They're both a little nervous, especially my brother. But I truly believe they both have great voices, and they'll only get better with time. I'm really sorry. I truly wish I could be here doing this myself. And I hope I'll be back soon. Until then, I just want to say how grateful I am to them both. I honestly couldn't ask for a better family. And to all of you, thank you for being here and for making it this far with me. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
Everything I'm about to tell happened about 2 years ago. I've gotten a few answers since then, but honestly, not nearly enough to fully understand what really happened. I've told this story a couple of times already, mostly because I think people need to hear about situations like this. The more I've looked into it, the more I've realized things like this aren't as rare as people might think. And the reason I'm bringing it up again now is because not long ago I heard about something with a very similar vibe happening on the Pacific Crest Trail. Not the exact same thing, but close enough that it made my stomach drop when I heard it. Stuff like this can be malicious, it can be seriously dangerous, and in the wrong circumstances, it can absolutely be deadly. Anyway, this all happened a little over 2 years ago. I've always been someone who loves the mountains. I actually live up in the mountains myself, though not in some remote cabin or anything like that. It's a small village with plenty of houses around, So, I've got stores, neighbors, everything I need nearby. My house doesn't back directly into the forest either. It's more like living in a small town that just happens to sit right at the edge of wilderness. The thing is, if I walk about 10 minutes in one direction, I'm already stepping into the outer edge of the forest. And that's honestly the perfect balance for me, because I get to live somewhere that feels normal and connected, but at the same time, I can disappear into the woods whenever I want a bit of peace and quiet. When I was younger, I used to explore those woods constantly with my friends. We'd spend entire afternoons out there, climbing rocks, following little streams, getting lost, and then finding our way back again. And I think that's where my love for hiking and climbing really started. Those mountains aren't just where I live, they're one of my favorite places in the world. I've traveled a bit over the years, seen some incredible places, but honestly, there's something about coming back home and seeing those same ridgelines again that just feels right. Nothing truly bad had ever happened to me out there before. Sure, there had been a few tense moments over the years. Anyone who spends time in remote areas knows you have to stay aware of your surroundings. When people come hiking in places like this, they sometimes forget that they're not in a park or a city trail. You're in nature, and that means predators exist. Weather changes fast, and sometimes you run into people whose intentions aren't exactly good. So being prepared goes a long way. Having the right gear, trusting your instincts, knowing when something feels wrong. All that stuff can make the difference between a story you laugh about later and a situation that turns into something much worse. Anyway, the thing that happened to me took place on the third day of a hiking trip. I had decided to explore an area I'd never really been through before, a section closer to West Virginia. In that region, there are a few temporary shelters scattered along the trails. They're nothing fancy, just simple places hikers can use if the weather turns bad, or if they're covering longer distances. My plan that day had been to reach one of those shelters before nightfall. But earlier in the afternoon, I ran into another hiker on the trail. A pretty friendly guy who looked like he'd been having a rough time. His pack had busted a strap, and he was trying to patch it together with duct tape. So I stuck around for a bit and helped him out, which honestly didn't feel like a big deal at the time. But it did slow me down more than I expected. And by the time I got moving again, the sky had already started turning gray. And about half an hour later, the rain came down hard. At first, it was just a light drizzle, but pretty quickly, it turned into steady rain. On top of that, it was getting darker by the minute, and I really wasn't thrilled about the idea of navigating unfamiliar trails in the dark while everything was wet and slippery. So my first thought was simple. I figured I'd just set up my tent somewhere nearby and call it a night. The shelter I'd been aiming for was still a good distance away, and there was no way I was going to reach it before dark anyway. But then something unexpected happened. As I kept moving along the trail, I suddenly came across a structure I hadn't known was there. It was a fire lookout. Now, if you've ever stayed in one of those, you probably know they're actually pretty amazing places. Most of them sit high up on ridges or peaks, so whoever's inside can see huge sections of forest. Some are old and pretty rough, but others are still in decent condition, and hikers are allowed to use them as overnight shelters. I've stayed in a few before, and honestly, they're some of my favorite spots to spend a night out in the mountains. The only thing was, since I'd already run into 2 or 3 other hikers on that same trail, I figured there was a good chance someone might already be using it. That's usually how those places work. Whoever gets there first gets the space. Sometimes people share them, sometimes they don't. And it really depends on the vibe of whoever's already there. Still, I decided to check. The stairs leading up were damp from the rain and a little slippery, so I climbed them slowly. As I got closer, I tried peeking through the windows, and from what I could see inside, the place looked empty. That already felt like a small stroke of luck, so I opened the door and stepped inside. And right away, I felt relieved. The lookout actually seemed pretty well maintained. It looked fairly recent compared to some others I'd seen. And there were even a few supplies left behind by previous hikers. That's honestly pretty rare. A lot of these places get worn down over time because so many people pass through them, and not everyone treats them with much respect. But this one felt different. Someone had clearly taken care of it. Inside it was small but comfortable enough. There were a couple of chairs, a small structure that worked as a bed frame with an actual mattress on it, which again isn't something you always find in those places. Usually it's just a wooden platform. There was also a little built-in stove area where you could heat food, so overall I was pretty happy to have stumbled onto it. The first thing I did was change out of my wet clothes. That was my main priority at that point. I hung the damp stuff over the chairs so it could dry a bit. Then I set up my sleeping bag on the mattress and started getting settled. I'd probably been inside the lookout for about 10 minutes, maybe a little more, when I heard the first noise. It was subtle, something like a wooden board shifting slightly. At first I didn't think much of it. Old structures make noises all the time, especially when there's wind or rain outside. So I paused for a second, looked around the room, and when I didn't see anything unusual, I just went back to what I was doing. After that, I cooked a quick meal, ate, and started winding down for the night. Before going to sleep, I sat on the mattress for a while, reading with my headlamp on. The lookout itself didn't have any electricity, so my headlamp and a small flashlight were the only sources of light in the whole place. Outside the windows, the forest had already turned completely black. That combination created this weird kind of atmosphere inside. Not exactly scary, but very quiet, very isolated, almost like being in a cabin lit only by candlelight. I was feeling pretty comfortable until I heard another sound. And this time, it was closer. I stopped reading immediately and looked up. Again, I slowly scanned the whole room, trying to figure out where it had come from. But I couldn't see anything. Still, something about it made me pause a little longer this time. Because even though I couldn't find the source, I was starting to feel that strange kind of discomfort. The kind that creeps in slowly when something in your gut starts telling you that maybe you're not quite as alone as you thought you were. So, for the first time since getting there, I actually stood up from the bed and started looking around properly. And the weird thing was that the whole place suddenly felt different. Not in a way I could clearly explain. Just that strange feeling like something inside the cabin had slightly shifted. Which made no sense at all because the fire lookout was tiny. I mean, genuinely tiny. There was nowhere for another person to hide in there with me. But still, I had heard that noise. There was no denying that. And even though a part of my brain kept trying to tell me it was probably nothing, I wasn't about to be the kind of person who ignores their instincts just to feel better. so I started walking around the inside of the lookout, slowly checking everything. I looked behind the chairs, near the stove, then crouched down and checked under the bed frame too. The structure was pretty solid and lifted a bit off the floor, so I figured maybe some small animal had crawled underneath somehow. But when I looked, there was nothing there, not even a shadow moving. After a few minutes of searching, I had to admit to myself that I couldn't find anything wrong. And that left me in this slightly uncomfortable middle ground, where I couldn't explain the sound, but I also couldn't point to anything actually dangerous. For a moment, I even considered grabbing my gear and leaving anyway. If the weather had been clear, I probably would have done exactly that. Just walked a little farther into the forest and set up my tent somewhere away from the lookout. But when I stepped closer to the window and looked outside, the rain was still coming down, and the forest had turned completely black. Not the kind of dark you get near cities where there's still a glow in the sky. This was the kind where the trees just disappear into pure darkness after a few feet. And even though my headlamp was pretty good, wandering through unfamiliar forest in the middle of the night, in the rain, over wet ground and roots, just wasn't a smart move. So, eventually I told myself I was probably overthinking things, and I went back to the bed. I tried reading again for a while, but honestly, I couldn't focus anymore. My eyes kept moving over the same lines without really processing them, and after a few minutes, I just gave up, turned off the page light, and laid back on the mattress, staring up at the wooden ceiling. At that point, the whole lookout was quiet again, except for the rain tapping against the windows. I'd been lying there maybe 5 minutes, just staring up into the dark, when I noticed something. At first, it was so faint, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again. Right above the bed, on the ceiling, there was the faintest little flicker. Not a beam of light, nothing strong like that. Just a tiny little glint that appeared for a split second, and then disappeared. Almost like something reflective catching a bit of light. I kept staring at it. A few seconds passed, and then it flickered again. A tiny point of light, barely visible, blinking once every now and then. The only reason I even noticed it was because I was already lying there staring at the ceiling. If I had just gone straight to sleep, I never would have seen it. The moment my brain actually processed what I was looking at, my entire body went cold. Because suddenly, it was obvious that someone was above me. Somewhere on the roof of that fire lookout, either outside or hidden in some kind of recess in the structure, there was someone positioned directly over that spot, watching me the entire time. My whole body felt like it was buzzing with adrenaline at that point, like every nerve had switched on all at once. But somehow, I forced myself to stay still for a few seconds and think about what I needed to do next. I basically had two choices. I could grab the big pack that had most of my supplies in it, things like food and extra gear, or I could grab my smaller backpack, which only had a couple of protein bars in it, but also had my handgun and my satellite phone. The decision took maybe half a second, and the moment my brain made it, my body just moved. I jumped up from the bed, rushed to the smaller backpack, grabbed it, swung the door open, and bolted down the stairs as fast as I could. The second my boots hit the ground outside, I heard movement above me. Whoever had been up there had clearly not expected me to run like that, because a moment later I heard them scrambling down as well, At that point, I didn't really have time to process anything. The only thought running through my head was that someone had been inside that structure with me the entire time, waiting for me to fall asleep so they could do whatever they had planned to do. And I had no intention of sticking around to find out. So I ran. I ran as fast as I could into the forest, rain hitting the leaves all around me, branches slapping against my jacket as I pushed through them. But there was a problem. The flashlight I had in this smaller bag wasn't nearly as strong as the one I'd left inside the lookout. The main one had a powerful beam that could cut through the trees pretty well, but this one was weaker. I could see the ground just enough to keep moving, but anything more than a few feet ahead was just darkness. So I was basically sprinting half blind through wet forest, trying not to trip while also fumbling with the bag to pull the flashlight out properly. At the same time, I kept shouting back over my shoulder that I was armed and that I wouldn't hesitate to fire if I had to. The truth, though, was that I had no idea if the person chasing me was armed too, and I could hear them behind me. Not right on top of me, but definitely running in the same direction, crashing through branches and leaves as they followed. And then the inevitable happened. Between the rain, the slippery ground, and the roots sticking out everywhere, my foot caught on something and I went down hard. I hit the ground and my head slammed against the dirt, and for a moment, everything went a little fuzzy. That's when real panic hit me, because I was suddenly on the ground, dizzy, vulnerable, and I knew the person behind me was still coming. So the only thing I could do was reach into the bag, grab the handgun as fast as I could, and bring it up in front of me. I pointed it toward where I knew he was coming from. At that point, he was maybe 16 feet away from me, but I still couldn't see him clearly in the darkness. I just knew he was there. Then I saw movement. And a second later, he stepped into the faint edge of my flashlight beam. He was dressed completely in black, and he had some kind of hood over his head. Not the hood of a jacket either. More like one of those fabric hoods that cover most of your face, leaving only small openings. I aimed the gun directly at him and told him that if he took one more step, I would fire. Now, a lot of people like to think they know how they'd react in a moment like that. They imagine themselves pulling the trigger without hesitation. But the reality of holding a gun in your hand and actually being seconds away from using it on another human being is something completely different. Your body is flooded with adrenaline, your mind is racing, part of you wants to act immediately, while another part is trying to process what's even happening. Maybe I should have shot him in the leg. Maybe I should have tried to disable him and call the police right there. But in that moment, I just couldn't do it. So we stood there for a few seconds. Me on the ground, soaked and shaking, the gun pointed straight at him. Him standing about 16 feet away in the dark. Then, without saying a single word, he slowly turned around and disappeared back into the trees. I stayed there on the ground for a while after that, completely drenched from the rain, my whole body shaking from the adrenaline rush. Not even really from fear anymore, just the aftermath of everything that had just happened hitting me all at once. Eventually, I managed to grab my satellite phone and call the park rangers. I explained where I was and told them exactly what had happened. Then I just waited. It took them about 3 hours to reach me. By the time they finally got there, the sky was already starting to lighten a little, since I'd gone to sleep pretty late that night to begin with. During that entire time, I just sat there on the forest floor with the gun in my hands, pointing out into the darkness, half expecting that guy to come back at any moment. But he never did. The rangers eventually took me out of there and brought me to a hospital, mostly because I'd hit my head pretty hard during the fall, and they wanted to make sure I didn't have a concussion. Luckily, it turned out to be nothing serious, just a bad impact. But once they started investigating the lookout itself, they found something that explained at least part of what had happened. Someone had modified the structure. Specifically, they had created a small hidden opening in the ceiling, right above the bed. The simple idea of someone being that sick leaves me completely creeped out. So, after everything that happened, there was obviously an investigation. The park rangers went back to the fire lookout with law enforcement, and from what they later told me, they were able to confirm that the structure had actually been tampered with. That small opening in the ceiling above the bed wasn't part of the original design. Someone had deliberately modified it, so there was a narrow space above the roof beams where a person could hide, or at least lie flat and look down through that gap. This means that whoever had been up there wasn't just passing through or hiding from the rain. They had built that space on purpose. And the position of the hole right above the bed made it pretty clear what the idea behind it was. Someone could stay hidden up there, wait for someone to come in, wait for them to fall asleep, and then do whatever they planned to do once that person was completely vulnerable. A few days after the incident, they told me they had actually detained a man somewhere in the forest. Apparently, he had some strange things in his possession, stuff that could be used to restrain someone. They didn't go into a lot of detail with me, but the way they explained it was that he was considered a person of interest, and that the circumstances in which he was found were suspicious enough that they wanted to question him. At one point, they even asked me to come in and try to identify him. But the moment I saw the guy, I knew it wasn't him. I'm absolutely certain about that. The man who chased me that night was taller, noticeably taller, and much more heavily built. The guy they brought in looked smaller, thinner, and honestly just didn't match what I had seen in those few seconds when the flashlight beam hit him in the forest. So, I told them exactly that. I said I couldn't confirm it was the same person. Now maybe that other guy was doing something strange out there too. Maybe he had nothing to do with my situation. Or maybe there was some kind of connection that was never fully explained. I honestly have no idea. The police never followed up with me about it in detail, and eventually the whole thing just sort of faded out from their side. But one thing I know for sure is that the man who was inside that fire lookout with me, the one who chased me into the forest, was never found. And that's the part that still bothers me sometimes, because I don't know how long he had been hiding in that space above the ceiling. I don't know if he had just gotten there that day, or if he had been waiting there for hours, or even longer, hoping someone would eventually show up. What I do know is that he was clearly waiting for someone to walk into that lookout, get comfortable, fall asleep, and become an easy target. And that realization is honestly terrifying. Since then, I've actually heard about 2 other cases that were somewhat similar. Not in fire lookouts specifically, but in those temporary shelters you sometimes find along hiking trails. Apparently, there have been situations where people modified those structures too, either creating hidden openings, false panels, or ways to trap someone inside. I don't know how common it really is, And I don't want to sound like I'm trying to scare people away from hiking, because most of the time, these places are completely safe. But after what happened to me, I can tell you one thing for sure. I will never again walk into one of those shelters or lookout towers and just assume everything is normal. Now, whenever I enter a place like that, especially if I'm alone and far from other people, I check everything. The walls, the ceiling, the corners, behind the bed frames, any panels that look slightly out of place. I make sure there aren't any hidden spaces, false walls, anything that could allow someone to watch from above or hide nearby. It might sound a little paranoid, but after that night, I'd rather take a few extra minutes checking every inch of the place than ever go through something like that again. Growing up, I was always a chubby kid. I don't mean just a little overweight. I mean the kind of kid who carries that weight, not just on their body, but in everything they do. In how they walk, how they talk, how they look at themselves. A lot of that came from my home life, which wasn't great. And food kind of became my way of dealing with things, my escape. The one thing that felt consistent when everything else didn't. But then on top of that, school wasn't any better. Because kids notice those things, and they don't let them go. So I ended up getting bullied a lot for my weight. And those two things combined just completely destroyed my self-esteem in a way that stuck with me for years. Even later on, when I hit my teenage years and started working out, eating better, and eventually got into really good shape, none of that actually fixed what was going on in my head, because every time I looked in the mirror, I still saw that same kid, the one people used to laugh at, the one nobody wanted to be around. It didn't matter how much I changed physically, that image never really went away. So by the time I got to college, even though I looked completely different, I still carried myself the same way. Quiet, unsure, kind of submissive, never really knowing how to fit in or who to talk to. And people, especially other guys who were insecure in their own way but better at hiding it, could pick up on that immediately and would still mess with me, just in more subtle ways. I'm saying all of this just to give you some context, because when one of the most popular guys in my class invited me to go on a hike with him in the mountains, I didn't even hesitate. I said yes immediately, because I was starving for real connection, for real friendship. And in my head, I thought that if someone like him accepted me, everything would change. People would start seeing me differently, like I belonged, like I was one of them. But more than that, I think I just wanted to finally be able to look at myself and see someone worth being around. So, when he suggested we drive out to a trail in West Virginia, I went along with it without questioning much, even though it was about a 2-hour drive from where we lived, and even though the forest he picked was one I had heard about my whole life from my grandparents, who used to tell these weird, unsettling stories about things that happened out there. I'll be honest, I was a little nervous about going, but I didn't want to show that, not to him, not when I finally had a chance to be included in something. What I did find a little strange, though, was that he wanted it to be just the two of us. And when I asked about it, he told me his friends didn't want to come because they were scared of the stories about the place, and that he figured I wouldn't be like that I'd be cool enough to go anyway. And I'm not gonna lie, that got to me. It boosted my ego in a way I wasn't used to. And during the drive, I actually felt good, like maybe this was the start of something different for me. The plan was to camp for 2 nights and do some hiking around the area. But pretty early on, I started noticing something that didn't sit right with me. Because while I had brought a tent, proper gear, extra food, basically everything you'd expect for a couple of nights out there, he barely had anything with him. At first I thought maybe I had just over-prepared, which is something I tend to do. But looking back now, I'm pretty sure he never planned on staying out there that long in the first place. We started hiking, and about 20 minutes in, we were still on the more popular part of the trail, so there were a few people around. Nothing unusual, just other hikers enjoying the weather. But then there was this moment where we stopped for a bit, and I swear I saw him making some kind of gesture toward a guy who was walking past us. It wasn't obvious, but it wasn't nothing either, and it immediately caught my attention. I asked him if he knew the guy, and he just kind of brushed it off, saying no, that the guy had made some weird motion and he was just trying to figure out what it meant. But the way he said it felt off, like something made up on the spot, and I couldn't shake that feeling. It was small, but it stuck with me. And for some reason, it made me uneasy enough that I told him I was going to grab some water. And while I was reaching into my bag, I also took the knife I had brought. Just a kitchen knife, nothing special, but sharp, and moved it into the small pouch I kept on me so I could reach it quickly if I needed to. I didn't even fully understand why I did that at the time. It just felt like one of those instinctive decisions you make without thinking too much about it. And looking back, I'm really glad I listened to that feeling. Later that day, after we had been walking for a while and hadn't seen anyone else on the trail for at least an hour, we stopped again, and he told me he was going to step off the trail for a second, said he needed to take a leak, and walked off into the trees. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after a minute or two, I started to notice how quiet everything had gotten. And that's when I saw him, a man standing in the distance, partially hidden between the trees, just watching us. The moment I looked directly at him, he started walking toward me. I called out to Jake, trying to keep my voice steady, telling him there was someone out there and that he was coming our way, but there was no response. That's when something in me really started to shift, because it didn't make sense. Why had he gone so far off the trail? Why wasn't he answering? Where was he? I moved toward the direction Jake had gone, calling his name again, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound, just that growing feeling that something was very, very wrong. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man getting closer, picking up his pace slightly, not running, but not exactly walking normally either, and that was enough for me to panic. So I turned and started heading back toward the trail as fast as I could, calling for Jake one last time, but deep down, I already knew he wasn't coming back. I couldn't see him anywhere, and the longer I stood there, the worse it felt, so eventually I just started running. And that's when I saw the second man. He stepped out from the side, and I recognized him instantly as the same guy from earlier, the one I had seen Jake making gestures to, near the start of the trail. And in that moment, everything just clicked into place in the worst possible way. Jake hadn't invited me out there to hang out. He had set me up. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of fear mixed with betrayal at the same time, because the one person I had trusted, the one person I thought might actually see me differently, had just handed me over to something I didn't even understand yet. I didn't think, I just ran, and the only thing that saved me in that moment was the fact that all those years of working out, of pushing myself, of refusing to go back to who I used to be, actually meant something, because I was fast enough to put some distance between us, at least for a while. But I could hear them behind me, crashing through the trees, closing the gap slowly, and no matter how fast I ran, it didn't feel like it was enough. At one point, one of them must have known the terrain better than I did, because he cut across through the trees and suddenly appeared right in front of me, intercepting my path before I even had time to react. I barely had a second to process what was happening before he lunged at me, and all I could do was pull out the knife and swing it without really aiming, just trying to get him off me. I felt the blade connect with something, and he let out this horrible raw sound, immediately pulling back, clutching his arm, and I saw that I had torn into his bicep, not clean, not precise, just enough to make him let go. Then I didn't stop again. I couldn't. I just kept running, gripping the knife, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode, until eventually I saw someone ahead on the trail. Another hiker. At first, when he saw me coming out of the trees, covered in dirt, holding a bloodied knife, he panicked and started backing away. But I started yelling, trying to explain between breaths that there were people behind me, that I needed help, that I wasn't the threat. And I think something in my voice made him stop. He actually decided to help me. Something in my voice made it clear that I wasn't exaggerating, that I wasn't just some guy being dramatic. I was genuinely panicking, and I needed help right then and there, and he picked up on that immediately. He told me pretty quickly that he knew that trail really well, that he'd hiked that area multiple times before, and that not too far from where we were, there was a small shelter, kind of tucked away, where we could hide out and get through the night safely. And he also mentioned that he had some form of protection on him, so I shouldn't worry, that he wasn't just gonna leave me hanging if those guys showed up. That did calm me down a bit, I'm not gonna lie, but at the same time, there was still this part of my brain that just wouldn't shut off, this constant voice telling me that I'd already trusted the wrong person once that day. So, what was stopping me from making that same mistake again? For a while, I genuinely wondered if he could be involved too, if maybe this whole thing was bigger than I thought, like maybe they were all in on it somehow. So, even as we made our way to that shelter and settled in for the night, I kept catching myself glancing over my shoulder, listening to every little sound in the woods, every branch snapping, every shift in the wind, thinking that at any moment those guys would come out of the darkness and that this man next to me would suddenly switch on me as well. The night felt incredibly long, like time had just stretched out in the worst possible way, and my mind kept running through scenario after scenario, none of them good, all of them ending with me not making it out of there. But the truth is, nothing actually happened. He stayed calm the whole time, kept reassuring me in a way that didn't feel forced, didn't feel fake, just steady, like someone who had been in tough situations before and knew how to keep it together. At one point, I remember asking him why he even bothered helping me, because most people wouldn't get involved in something like that. And he just kind of shrugged and said he had a younger brother, probably around my age, and if something like that ever happened to him, he'd hope someone would step in and help. There was something about the way he said it that felt real, not like an excuse, not like something rehearsed, just honest. And I think that's when I finally started to relax a little, not completely, but enough that those last couple hours before sunrise didn't feel as suffocating as the rest of the night. Once morning came, we packed up, and started moving again, sticking to the trail and keeping a steady pace. And after a while, we finally reached the trailhead, where there were other people around, which immediately made me feel safer, like I was back in the real world again. We were able to contact the authorities pretty quickly, and they showed up not long after. And then Jake showed up. He came walking into the trailhead like nothing had happened, arguing with me, saying I had abandoned him out there, that he'd been looking for me. He had a few cuts on his arm, but nothing deep, nothing that looked like he'd actually been attacked. And the more I looked at him, the more everything started to click in my head all at once. The lack of gear from the beginning, the way he disappeared at the exact moment those guys showed up, the fact that he didn't respond when I was literally shouting his name, and then the idea that somehow they went after me but just let him go. It didn't make any sense, unless he was part of it. I told the police everything, every little detail, including the fact that I was almost certain he was involved, that those men didn't just randomly appear, that there had to be some kind of setup. And to their credit, they did take it seriously. They said he would be looked into. They said that his story didn't fully add up either. But at the same time, there wasn't enough solid proof to actually do anything about it, so nothing really came of it in the end, and that was probably one of the hardest parts. Just knowing that he got to walk away from it. For the rest of college, I lived with that in the back of my mind, constantly, always watching where I was going. Never walking alone at night, avoiding isolated areas on campus, because I genuinely didn't know if he'd try something again, or if those people were still out there somewhere. It changed the way I saw people, the way I trusted people, and honestly, it took me a long time to get past that. Eventually, I graduated, I moved out of state, got away from all of that, and little by little, I stopped looking over my shoulder every 5 seconds. But those 3 years, they left a mark. I did stay in touch with the guy who helped me though, because the truth is, if it wasn't for him, I don't know how that situation would have ended. And funny enough, he really did have a younger brother around my age, and over time, we actually became close. So, in a weird way, something good did come out of all of this, and now I kind of see both of them as family. I wanted to share this because sometimes the people you trust the fastest are the ones you should be the most careful with. And I know what it's like to feel invisible, to want acceptance so badly that you ignore your instincts. But if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that your gut feeling is there for a reason. Listen to it.